Mr. Hanley, a lot of discussion, I think, today, not really much focus or talking about reliability, whether it's CLCPA or anything. And my concern, it has a lot to do with reliability. So I'd like to get your input, given the fact that the NISO has talked about the reliability gap come 2040. NISO chairman talking about 32,000 megawatts. Even the Climate Action Council identified 15 to 25 gigawatts of a shortage of energy supply. I mean, that's enough to the equivalent of 10 to 15 nuclear hydroelectric power plants, enough to power every home in New York. In the power trends, the NISO specifically identifies 10% of unidentifiable emission-free dispatchable resources. And we know wind and solar is not dispatchable because you can't be power on demand. And with the increased demand in electricity that's projected at 65 to 85%, with full electrification of our buildings and our vehicles, where are we heading? And then the other area I'm concerned about, we talked about my colleague talked about the brownout and possible brownout in New York City during the summer, but the NISO's also identified the shift in the peak use in the future to the winter time. And what are we talking about there? And I think you guys did a report on this. If we're talking about brownouts in the middle of winter, when people are dependent on wind and solar, which is not reliable and not dispatchable to heat their homes, and what kind of damage could that do? I mean, that, especially from that perspective. So I'd just like to get, with my time, just talk a little bit about the reliability and just kind of with your background and expertise on this.
Yes, that's one of my major concerns is I'm all in support of emissions-free energy, but the emphasis on pure renewables. Hydroelectric is great, it's reliable, it's dispatchable, but wind and solar, we cannot command the wind or the sun. Where we are headed is where California was with blackouts, rolling blackouts a couple of summers ago. We're headed where Texas hit not this past winter, but in February of 2021, where they had $200 billion in property damages, and somewhere between 250 and 700 people died because they lacked electricity in the middle of winter. Some people were without power for days on end in sub-freezing temperatures. New York simply can't take that risk. And this 10% gap in our energy supply that's supposed to be filled by these dispatchable emissions-free resources, that's going to be probably either renewable natural gas or hydrogen. But there are people who oppose both of those gases as well. And currently, they're just simply not economically feasible. And we don't know that they're going to become economically feasible in the relevant time period. So the over-reliance on wind and solar is going to put New York in a very, very high-risk position.
And shouldn't we be very cautious about because even the NISO said even now, we're at a tipping point with some of these our reliability now because of the challenges we're facing with the grid. And shouldn't we, it seems like the DEC in particular is not approving permits for existing operations and for pending operations. And shouldn't we be sure, before we're not approving that reliable source of energy generation, and we know 60% of the people heat their homes with natural gas and 40% of our generation comes from natural gas, shouldn't we, before we shut those down and not approve those, make sure that technology of dispatchable emission-free resources is on the books and proven before we shut down operations that work and are reliable? Shouldn't we make sure we have that dispatchable resources, emission-free resources working and proven before we just shut down existing operations to ensure the reliability of the grid?
I agree. And both the CLCPA and this legislation provide for those escape clauses, but currently it doesn't appear that the DEC is interested in using that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.